Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast, brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind, a personal and professional development program for physicians who want to learn entrepreneurship. Today, we have an incredible guest, Dr. Arlen Meyers, and he's going to be talking to us about physician entrepreneurship, to be or not to be. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hey guys, I'm super excited today. We're here meeting Dr. Arlen Meyers. He's president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs and emeritus professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've met each other briefly online on LinkedIn. Is where we've seen a lot of each other's work, and I follow you. I see how you are an inspiration, and then you have this Society for Physician Entrepreneurs, and we're gonna get into the details of that very shortly. But before we get there, let's start at the beginning. It's like, who decided to be a doctor? Was it like little, young Arlen, teen Arlen? Who was that?
Right. So, no, I was not a 5-year-old that grew up saying the only thing I ever want to do with my life is to be a doctor. That absolutely positively was not me. In fact, and my background is a little informative. Both of my parents were children of immigrants. And my dad was, long story short, first to go to college, couldn't speak English until he was a young kid, and wound up as a pharmacist. And he eventually opened a corner drugstore in a very ethnic urban neighborhood. Subsequently, he wound up being actually a professor at Temple University in their pharmacy school. And I tell you that because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But when I worked there, actually, my first career objective was to be an architect. And the reason that I wound up being a doctor had nothing to do with my wanting to be a doctor. It had to do with several things, not the least of which was, like most doctors, I knew how to memorize a bunch of stuff and take tests and tell interviewers exactly what they wanted to hear so I could get into medical school. Two, at the time that I was applying...
Are you saying that doctors are manipulators of data?
No,
I'm saying,
no, manipulator is a loaded word. I would say pretty much most, if not every doctor, knows how to game the system to get in. They know the T's to cross, the I's to dot. You probably did. I certainly did. And I was just fortunate. I was also lucky that I won the ovary lottery and lived in the right zip code and a whole bunch of other things that had nothing to do with my ability to be a doctor. And it's the same right now. Right now, basically, it's the rich taking care of the rich. So the system is, in that regard, very broken, in my opinion. But it is what it is. And I was lucky to be one of the haves instead of the have-nots. And secondly, like most kids that wind up going to medical school, I had above average intelligence. I'm not a genius. You don't have to be a genius to be a doctor. Actually, you don't have to be that smart to be a doctor, in my opinion. You have to have like an above IQ. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. And finally, the Vietnam War was going on. And like it or not, undergrads and kids that were privileged, unquote, avoided the draft. So I'm being very honest with you and very frank. I mean, sounded like a good gig being a doctor, but I am not one of those people that grew up saying, gee, that's all I ever wanted to do. Did I dissect worms and, frogs and stuff in biology class? Sure. Actually, the people these days who are more likely to be a doctor are people who take apart computers and radios and electronic stuff and put them back together again so they can code and know how to be an electronics geek. But that wasn't me. And so I wound up going through a fairly traditional undergrad medical school residency back east in Philly. And then I got recruited to be an assistant professor at the University of Colorado in the School of Medicine, basically working in a safety net hospital, which was the major shock and trauma unit and still is in Denver. At those days, it was called Denver General. These days, it's Denver Health. So again, fast forward, because we don't have a lot of time, I've subsequently been through 3 or 4 career pivots. The first one was to be an academic surgeon and go up through the food chain, assistant, a vice chairman of the department, a program manager, and all the committees, and da 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 da. And that wound up with me pivoting during my training, and subsequently in my career, being an accidental med tech entrepreneur. What do I mean by that? I'm a head and neck surgeon. My subspecialty was in oral cancer. And myself and a bunch of other folks invented a gadget that optically detects cancer in the mouth. Whole nother story. At that point, after we did most of the stuff, patents, money, tech transfer, all that other stuff, I wrote a textbook on oral detection of cancer, all that stuff. Then I said to myself, well, now what do we do? How do we get this thing across the goal line and get it to a patient? In those days, in my opinion, most doctors couldn't spell entrepreneurship. They had no idea what I was.
Can you say what those days were, what year we're talking
Yeah,
about?
this is like late 80s, early 90s. So we're talking 25, 30 years ago. And I started looking around and asking people, well, who's going to teach me this stuff? And where are the people that I should talk to? And how do I find the resources? And where do I find somebody that's done this before? And all that. And I wasn't satisfied with the answer. Let's put it that way. So I decided, along with a bunch of other people, that there was a problem. And that problem is and was most white coats, that is, scientists, engineers, doctors, health professionals, you name it. Every single one of them thinks they have a good idea at some point in their career. The fact of the matter is, most of the time, and again, this is just my opinion, and it was my personal experience, that it was just that. It was an idea. It wasn't an improvement. It wasn't an invention. It wasn't a product. It wasn't a business. It was an idea. And by definition, an idea is something in your head that never sees the light of day. So it doesn't do anybody any good. Even if you had a good idea that had commercial or deployment or development potential, most people would have no clue what to do with it. They wouldn't know how to do that. Now, again, I'm talking back when we started this. So I decided with a bunch of other people, I guess we're going to have to do it ourselves. So we had a bunch of folks. We created the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. That was my next pivot, because the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs is an international open biomedical and clinical innovation and entrepreneurship network, and it's a not-for-profit. Did I have any experience starting a not-for-profit? Zero. Did I have any experience developing a med tech device? Zero. Did I know how to do any of this stuff? No. How would I don't know. I was a grunt in the trenches. I was an academic doc, patients, patient care, research, education, community service. I jumped through all the hoops to get promoted. And oh, by the way, there was no promotion and tenure credit awarded to faculty who do what I was doing. And in many instances, it still isn't awarded. It's still not something that is valued by what I call the academmented, which means medical schools. They just haven't changed how they see things. It's not included in the curriculum. I mean, if you ask 100 doctors, if you knew then what you know now, what would you want to learn in medical school that you didn't? The business of medicine. That's the answer I get. And we can get into that whole thing about why it isn't and why it wasn't and all that, but that's kind of the attitude. So I didn't like that. I guess I'm just sort of a person who's a pain in the neck. And if I see something I don't like, I try to do something to fix it. So we did. We spun out the Society of Physician. That's a very long story. We don't have time to go into that, but eventually we wound up creating a 501c3 C6 organization in 2011. So we're now 12 years into this. Arguably, it took us that long to be famous overnight, but I don't really see us being that famous because we still have a long way to go. So that was the next pivot. And then I wound up retiring from clinical practice as an emeritus professor in 2015. Now, I had been working on this idea and testing it and where does it go? And again, that's a very long story, but I worked on it. I graduated business school in 1984. I was the only doctor in the cohort. And I just had an interest in, I found myself being more interested in the Wall Street Journal than the New England Journal. So I just kind of got into this stuff, but I just couldn't find a place to play. There weren't a lot of sandbox where you could play. Fast forward, so I retired in 2015. As I said, we had launched SOAP in 2011, so it was an overlap of two parallel careers. It wasn't just get to the edge and you're done. I was planning this transition. And then I wound up no longer teaching people how to operate. Instead, now I teach them how to start businesses and get ideas to patients. So there's a lot of transferable skills, and that's another message to this story, but that's where I am now. So long story short, undergrad, med school, residency, 40-year career, taking care of patients, and now I teach healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship around the world. I consult to a bunch of companies, startups, scale-ups, grown-ups, people that, frankly, will pay me to give them advice. And I'm the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs.
Well, congratulations on what seems to have been a wonderful career or careers with everything. And there's more to come, right? Like you still have tons to give right now.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff to do.
Yeah, tons of stuff coming. I do have a question before we get to the present time.
Right.
When you went to medical school, to your business school, and you were in these positions in the departments and all this stuff, how was entrepreneurship helping you be a doctor to your patients at that time? Did it do anything for the way that you were presenting to your patients at that time?
Well, you're making the assumption that going to business school helps you be an entrepreneur.
Well, I don't know. I'm asking.
Right. In my opinion, it doesn't. Frankly, I think most MD, MBA programs, and I helped create one at Colorado. Now there are all kinds of joint programs. The hot stuff now is MD engineering, MD computer science, but in those days it was MD MBA. And there are dual degree programs, and actually of the 200 medical schools in the United States, over 60% of them have combined MD MBA programs. Now, far be it for me to tell anybody don't get more education. But if your goal, and again, this is strictly a private cost benefit decision. Do I get it? Should I get an MBA? I get that question all the time. My answer is, first of all, most MD MBA programs are second rate. There's probably a handful of MBA programs that are worth anything. Most of them do not address specifically clinical medicine and healthcare or sick care as a separate academic domain. So we're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about supply chain, General Motors, and all that stuff. I don't think that the competencies that you need are taught, nor will you acquire them in an MBA program. 70% of what you learn is from experience. 20% is from the people you know, and 10% is what you learn in a classroom. Bottom line, don't let school get in the way of your education. So was it interesting and fun? Yes. Did I meet some interesting people? Yes. Do I still communicate with them? Yeah. It had absolutely nothing to do with my ability to do what I'm doing now. Now, that's just me.
So at some point you say that you went into this med tech career, right?
Right.
Which happened at the same time that you were seeing patients.
Correct.
At the same time that you're seeing patients, you're developing this program and this book that helped you identify cancers and all this stuff. And you're involved in a business.
Right.
So you're doing research. So at that time, one of the things that, and I think it's a little bit different question than what we were thinking earlier, is entrepreneurship, in my case, has helped me come to my patients in a happier way? Not that the MBA made you an entrepreneur, but at the time you were involved in a project that was entrepreneurial. Did that involvement help you in any way, shape, or form, or change the way that you approach your patients in terms of the system at the time? Understanding that, in medicine, we've had a lot of transition, especially in the last 15 years, in the way that medicine is practiced. Did you see that made you come to your patients in a different way? Were you happier? Were you more
Yes.
interested? Were you more curious about things? How did that change
Right.
your life at that time?
So there's 2 points I want to emphasize. One is, what is entrepreneurship? The definition of entrepreneurship. What are we talking about? The unfortunate reality, in my view, is the conventional wisdom and socially the media, it's just about creating a company and growing it to $1 trillion, which is not that's not my understanding of entrepreneurship. It's one way that is mostly technopreneurship, whether it's media, whatever you do. My definition of entrepreneurship is, and stick with me because there's several parts to it. One, it's the pursuit of opportunity. Two, you do it under volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions, so-called VUCA conditions. Three, the point of it, and this is probably the most important part, is to create user or stakeholder defined value. And you do that through the design, development, and deployment of innovation using a viable business model, and in the case of sick care, to accomplish one or several of the sextuple aims. Now, that's a lot of words, and we could get deep dive into each one of them, but the point is, there are lots of ways to satisfy that definition in addition to creating a company. Now, second point, if you accept that definition, ask 100 people, you get 100 people, different definitions. That's mine. If you accept that definition, then what does entrepreneurship teach a doctor? What do you get out of this? Which gets to your second question. Did I learn anything? Yeah, I learned a ton. But the clinical mindset is different than the entrepreneurial mindset. They're two overlapping circles, and physician entrepreneurs play in the middle where the two interact. There's some commonalities, but there are a lot of differences. So to your point, what did I learn from doing my career involved with entrepreneurship? I think it made me a better clinician. I think it made me a better problem seeker. I think it allowed me to use transferable skills and certainly develop new ones that I had no clue what to do. I mean, I was clueless. I mean, I didn't have the competencies you need to. It helped me reveal my innerpreneur. So what do I mean by an innerpreneur? I mean that I think 1% to 2% maybe of white coats have an entrepreneurial mindset. Some of them, maybe a little bit more, have an entrepreneurial mindset, but they're too smart to let people know they do, because if they said so in the medical school interview, they wouldn't get in. So same with scientists, same with engineers. You have to do certain things to toe the line to get in. Now, are things changing? Are the admission requirements easing up a bit? Yeah, and I can give you several examples. But you asked me back then, what was I dealing with? That's what I was dealing with. So medical students these days, particularly, I mean, they're just too smart. They're not going to say, and I'll give you an example. So I ask people, well, I'll ask you. So suppose you were tapped to be on a community representative to your medical school in your area, and you're on the admissions committee. And you have an applicant who you're talking to, and she says, and you say to her, why do you want to go to University of Florida or, Tampa, wherever? And why do you want to be a doctor? And that's a softball question that any applicant knows what to say. I wanted to do this, ever since I was a little kid. I want to take care of people that are unfortunate. I want to teach residents. I want to do research. I want to change the world. Those are the usual answers. And they were my answers. I mean, I'm not, that's what I said. Anyway, she says, well, you know what? The only reason I want to go to medical school is I want to get the MD or DO after my name. I really have very little intention of practicing clinical medicine for the rest of my life, and I'm certainly going to not do it for as long as you did it, Dr. Meyers. I want to do other stuff other than see patients. And did I mention that my father is a venture capitalist who funds biotech companies? Would you let that person into your medical school?
If there was any seat left after everybody who gave the right answer, maybe.
Well,
but
there's
definitely
definitely
not the first option.
Right.
Yeah.
So thanks for being honest. So the answer is there are more people applying to medical schools now than ever. So the likelihood of your being on the bubble is slim to none with that answer. That's exactly what I'm saying, that the mindset of academia needs to change. It's one of the things we're trying to do. So and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I think we have more work to do.
So things have certainly changed since you first applied to medical school versus what we're doing right now. Even the way that we're practicing medicine since 2015, when you retired, till now has, it's a crazy evolution, or like regression, as I call it, of the practice of medicine. Let's move on to something that you were saying that I think is very important. You have these two circles that overlap, and only you, in your mind, you say like 1% to 2% have this entrepreneurial mindset. And we know it's not only about having the entrepreneurial mindset, it's also about having the skills and the capabilities that they don't teach us in medical school, that all these other kids are learning. At the same time that we're learning anatomy and physiology and all this stuff, these other kids are learning all these other things that they're developing. So by the time that we come out of medical school, you have the entrepreneurs are way ahead of what we are. Let's talk about the reasons why physicians should not be entrepreneurs. Why do you think physicians should not be? Because we're, as you say, we normally cover the beauty of entrepreneurship for physicians, and how we can have, we as you said, like you're smart, you're able to play, whatever, just try to learn what you have to learn to survive, right? And you have the capability to convince and memorize and all this stuff. So why physicians should not be, or why entrepreneurship is not for every physician? Let's put it that way.
Okay. So I believe, as I said, a very, very small percentage of people in white coats have an entrepreneurial mindset. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of things that go into being successful, but I think the three basic ones are mindset, means, and motivation. So the mindset, the good news is your mindset can be developed. Unlike a personality where you're kind of stuck with your personality, the psychologists tell us, when you're like 8 years old. Now, it turns out your personality does change as you get older, but you pretty much can't change the stripes on a tiger. I mean, you are who you are for whatever reason, nature, nurture, all the other stuff. So if you don't have that mindset, and number one, you don't even realize it, and number two, even if you did, you're not willing to do anything about it, then if I were you, I would just be a doctor and see patients. God knows I'm going to need you. And as far as people are telling me
there's a shortage.
There's a shortage, right?
There's a shortage and getting worse.
Well,
so that's why you're not getting to medical school right now, even more.
Right.
So that shortage will keep you away.
Reason. So number one, you don't have the mindset. Number two, you don't have the means. In other words, resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, non-clinical career guidance, those kinds of things are not in your repertoire. Number two, and what's even worse, you're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect which is you don't know what you don't know, and you're not willing to admit it because you're a doctor. You know everything. You're the smartest person in the room. And you've been told that your entire life since you were 5 years old. So you're saying, wow, I don't need you. I'm a doctor. I'm making more than 99% of the people in the world. I could be grumpy all I want, but the fact is it's a pretty good gig. So if I were you, if you don't have the resources, and pretty fundamentally, that means money. Now, I don't mean investment capital. I mean, how much money do you have as a person? And do you have the financial means to go down this road? Because you're going to need it. First of all, whatever you do is going to fail with a fairly high percentage. Number two, if you take time away from earning RVUs, as I did, and another question is, now let me get this straight. You're an academic doc. You're getting paid by the university of whatever. But you're doing all this stuff on the side. Who is paying for that? So you have to figure that out. And in my case, it came from research and development grants. There's a whole list of places you can go, but you have to buy out your clinical time, because the head of the department and the dean and everybody else, they want to know, why is your department in the red? And because Meyers is fooling around with this entrepreneurship stuff and not seeing enough patients. Meanwhile, the rest of the faculty are pissed off because they're doing stuff to cover for you and all that. So you have to figure that out and negotiate it. It takes actually political skills, and it takes some other things we can talk about, namely sponsors. But there's that reason. And finally, probably the most important is motivation. This is hard. What we're talking about, the decisions are hard. Having the conversations with your family is hard. I mean, imagine you come home and you say, guess what, darling? I'm quitting medicine because I want to start a company. Or I'm quitting medicine because I want to go to work as an advisor to a startup. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, you're $280,000 in debt. You've just finished your residency. You probably don't know very much about how to take care of patients, let alone how to take care of business. But you want to do this for whatever reason. That's a bad idea. So you really have to have the intrinsic motivation to do this. I call it, you make it personal, but you don't take it personally. So there are lots and lots of stories of entrepreneurs that have personal stories why they are doing this. Almost all of them do. A family member that died of a disease that was incurable, a kid that got sick, nobody could figure out the diagnosis, a horrible experience with the sick care system, just fed up with what's going on in medicine these days, you name it. But you have to be intrinsically motivated to do this. That's the personal part. Don't take it personally, because you're going to fail repeatedly. So you get up, you dust yourself off, you try it over again. And it gets to the point, if you want to score goals, you got to take a lot of shots. It doesn't happen once. And you learn from your failures. You develop a failure resume. Another problem is people don't learn from their mistakes. And you ask yourself, why is that? I think it's because people don't take personal responsibility for their failure. They blame it on the system. They're grumpy, corporate medicine, private equity, CBS, Apple, you name it. Everybody's eating my lunch. They moved my cheese. Wow, wow, wow. Nobody told me what to do. It's their fault. Why didn't they teach me to do this in medical school? So those are the three basic reasons I think you shouldn't do this. This meaning, just do what we're talking about. Now, as a supplement, maybe, because that way you get to learn. They think big, start small, stay small. You try little things. They work great. If they don't, go back to the drawing board, try something else. And finally, people do this because they either want to or they have to. And want to is what we're talking about. If you have this motivation to do it, if you have to, perfect examples were people during COVID and what's called accidental entrepreneurship or experiential or opportunistic entrepreneurship. I got to do something because I can't get out of the house and I need to make some money. So I'm going to try entrepreneurship because I have to. The other reason is death in a family, disability, divorce, disciplinary action where you lose your license because you did something stupid, deportation because of God knows what's going on in your country and you have to get out. So you wind up coming to the United States and you got to do something. So this is a case, and actually that last point is a significant indicator of what I call a social determinant of physician entrepreneurship. If you are an immigrant or a first or second generation of an immigrant, you are much more likely to wind up, if you look at the cohort of quote successful entrepreneurs, about 40 to 50% of them are of that category. And a significant percentage of unicorns are A, immigrants, B, technologists. So there's lots of social determinants that go into this. Another very interesting thing is, how old were you when you first sold something for money that you kept? And, I teach this to first year med students and, the food chain. So I asked that question. I said, how many of you have actually worked for money? And I'm shocked. 2 hands of 100 people go up. Why? Because they are so programmed, excuse the term, privileged, so they don't have to. All they do is study to go to med school. So I think that's another thing. And if we're up to me, what's a big piece of advice? Don't take my advice, number one, because what you're going to do is what you're going to do, not what I would have done. And secondly, learn how to sell something, anything. I don't care what it is. In my case, the first thing I sold were newspapers on the beach in Atlantic City. Like read all about it, that kind of stuff. I think I was like 8 or 10 years old. So there's lots of things that nature nurture, and if you go into the stories, you get a better understanding of why does someone wind up doing this, like somebody like me.
I can connect, I can relate to these stories. In my case, for example, my father, an entrepreneur, always had their business, different business, and we saw the failures and we saw the successes as well. And despite being an entrepreneur, there was a lack of financial education, which is part of entrepreneurship that we don't get because the one part is the business and the other part is the finances, for example. And I did start selling things when I was 7 years old in their businesses, and I loved it. It was
There
to
you
me,
go.
it was like such a wonderful experience, and the customer, taking care of the customer and all those things. And then
Right.
Eventually going to medicine, you have all these stories about the things that you want to do, and now mixing both of them have been a pleasure to do, despite of the challenges. And when you're saying that people are going to fail, we all fail. We don't want to admit it. We are not really necessarily prepared for those failures, but that's where the growth is. So you're so right. So all these reasons for us not to be entrepreneurs are like, yes, they're dead on.
Now, there's lots of reasons, given what I've just said, if you got the boxes checked off, that you would want to do this, not the least of which has to do with restoring the joy of medicine. Burnout, moral injury, has, all that stuff. It's fun. For me, it's a kick. And I like being what I did. I like being, that kind of thing. But it gives you a different perspective. And like I said, it makes you a better clinician. It introduces you to all kinds of interesting people. You can make money, a lot, or maybe not so much, but it's fun. You get to create stuff. You get to work with other people who are really, diverse, smart, that kind of stuff. It just gives you a different mindset. So yeah, I would certainly encourage people to do it. Obviously, we wouldn't have created this organization if we didn't think so. But do a lot of people a favor, and if this just isn't your gig, don't do it.
Exactly. Don't be pushing, like the same way, like you're not a physician because your dad or your mom told you to be a physician. You shouldn't be that because you're going to be
Right.
studying for the rest of your life. The same way for entrepreneurship because somebody's pushing you
Yeah.
to do something that you're really not prepared for. But on the other hand, let's just talk about one of the things that you mentioned, like the mindset of entrepreneur versus the
Right.
mindset of a physician and having certain skills that as a
Right.
physician you really don't have. They don't go
Right.
with what entrepreneur is. How would you to these days recommend to develop that entrepreneurial mindset?
You practice. First of all, you have to understand what they are. What are the competencies that define, first, what's a mindset? A mindset is simply how you interpret the world. You see something, you hear something, you experience something, everyone is going to interpret that differently. The typical example, I just saw something and you're all kinds of grumpy and whatever, versus, you know what? That's an opportunity. So is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? Is the benefit of what we're talking about the experience or is it the destination? And there's a whole list of other things am I more interested in the problem or am I more interested in a solution looking for a problem? Which is very, very typical for scientists, engineers, doctors, white coats, you name it. So, but you can learn these things. You can develop a different approach. Now, one extreme is cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, that's the basis of CBT. That thinking informs behavior and feelings, and they all sort of cross-connect to each other. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which actually dates back to ancient Rome in terms of philosophy, is about altering your thinking such that it rearranges your emotions, such that it changes your behavior, which then reinforces your thinking. So it's a continuous cognitive cycle. That's what it's about. Now, my view is, we can get into all the psychobabble, but it's the same sort of dynamic developing your mindset. Now, okay, Arlen, that sounds pretty interesting. So how do I do this? And what do I need to learn? What's different? Well, there's a whole long list of competencies, but the basic ones, and you can refer to this as the innovator's DNA. A book was written at Harvard Business School by Clayton Christensen, the famous disruptive innovation guy, and a bunch of other people. And basically, they identified certain core characteristics and mindset characteristics and competencies of successful entrepreneurs. Now, it wasn't just doctors. It was like all entrepreneurs and what's successful and what we could argue about that. But the point is, there's a couple of things that these people exemplified. One, they were very good connectors, very big networks. And doctors have very limited networks. They have very, very, very small networks. And the people they know are doctors. They're not anybody else outside of medicine. That's a problem. Sick care can't be fixed from inside. So if you're only talking to doctors, it's the blind leading the blind. So connectors is one. Probably the most significant one is observers. In other words, Steve Jobs said, innovation is about connecting dots. Well, if you have a view of the world and you're seeing what's going on, economics, politics, social mood, technology, you name it, entrepreneurs see things that other people just look at. They see connections. And that's why when we created the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, we made it an open innovation network. Anybody can join. You don't have to be a healthcare professional. For that very reason, we need outside in, inside out innovation. We need to hear how are other industries solving the problems that befall sick care. And every industry has. I don't care what the problem is. Experience, search, technology, innovation, education, you name it. Someone, for God's sake, we put people on the moon. There are people that know how to do this. So you got to talk to them and listen to them. So the next one is you have to be an experiment. You have to be willing to try things. Well, doctors are pretty good at that. That's what we get trained. That's the scientific method. You observe something, you create a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you run the experiment, you measure the results, and you decide, do you accept or deny the null hypothesis? If you don't, you go back and you do another experiment. It's the same thing in business. You have to test your business ideas and know how to do that. And people are really good at that who are in entrepreneurship. There are lots and lots of examples. People say, well, every 6 months, Apple or Google or somebody says, we're going to pull the plug on our healthcare thing that we rolled out 3 months ago. And they say, see, we told you didn't know anything about healthcare. No, they're smart people. They test stuff. If it doesn't work, they pull the plug and they move on. They're not going to invest $1 gazillion into something that just isn't working. So good for them. We don't do enough of that. So God bless them. I think you ought to go out and try everything. If it works, great. If it makes the system better, great. Show us the evidence. So those are some of the things, and they're good questioners. So they're always asking, why? Why not? What if? Suppose we did this. Let's give this a try. What do you think? So those are some of the core competencies. And every one of those things that I've mentioned, there are ways of practicing that. So it's just something you have to practice. It's just like learning how to take out a tumor in the neck. You just have to practice it.
And sometimes we are faced with the questions like, which book do I need to read to be an entrepreneur? It's like, which book do you need to read to be a doctor? Like, there's no one book. It's a career thing. It's the whole thing.
Right. Well, let's face it. When you get out of medical school, you don't know anything about taking care of patients. So you go through all this razzmatazz, and then you do a residency, and maybe you get a little bit better. But you really need several years, and that brings up another point. Because lately, what we're seeing now are medical students. The pipeline is leaking. By that I mean pre-meds that want to go to medical school change their mind. Medical students who are in medical school decide not to graduate. They drop out. If they do graduate, they decide not to do a residency and go to work for private equity or be an investment banker or some startup, particularly if they're in Boston or Silicon Valley or one of those places. If they do a residency, they're saying, I'm not so sure I want to be an ENT doctor. I decided I want to be a psychiatrist. So there's a leak there. And then when it comes to clinical practice, particularly early clinical practice, what I'm hearing from students, I just asked this, 85% of the students that I asked said they wanted to do something other than take care of patients when they finish.
It's amazing. Do you see anybody, like you just said that you retired from a 40-year career as an ENT physician? Like, do you see that happening? I don't see it happening.
No, I'm a dinosaur. That's not going to happen.
People are swiping through careers. People are like the same way that they swipe on a phone. The technology, life has changed in such a way, and we can talk about all the softwares of medicine and your life was defined for you, by you being a physician and all this stuff. But in general, it's really gonna deepen, I believe, our lack of physicians, right? And our profession is really switching. I don't foresee like the future of medicine is going to be quite different for what we have. And then enters AI, right? So artificial intelligence is something that's coming maybe to help with that gap, maybe to advance what we have. I don't know what it is, but certainly those leaks that are happening, they're happening from college. People are going through colleges and changing through different colleges the same way that they're swapping on the phone.
Well, I was going to say there's just an article about kids dropping out of college because they don't want to miss out on the AI opportunity in the Silicon Valley. If they don't get in the game now, they're figuring I'm just going to lose. I mean, it'll be done. They'll be gone. I mean, I won't be able to get in. I want to get on the leading edge of all this stuff.
Yeah, and that's how life is changing. Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit, in the last few minutes that we have, you were exposed to all these entrepreneurs and talking about physicians and missing on the AI wave. What have you seen? What's your thought in general about AI in healthcare?
So a couple, and I won't go into all the details, but I'm pretty deep in the weeds in all this in terms of ecosystems and AI. So here's what I think. Number one, we're early. And like most transformational technologies, the impact is overestimated in the short run and underestimated in the long run. The example that I give is the iPhone was launched in 1990. Look where we are now. You can't survive without an iPhone. Now, would anyone have predicted where we are now 25 years ago? No. It was a phone. It was kind of cool. You could walk around with it. You didn't have to have a regular phone. That was it. It was a phone. Now it's like you can't do without it. God forbid you lose your phone. So that's an example. Secondly, we're entering the fifth industrial revolution, which, and we don't have time to go into all that, but basically the idea is that what is empowering economic growth around the world in relationship to artificial intelligence is how man interfaces with machine. So what is that going to look like? Some people have made it an existential crisis and basically said it's like Oppenheimer and the bomb. My God, what have we done? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a data scientist. But on one extreme, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's going to transform who we are as human beings. On the other extreme, there aren't going to be any more human beings. So I don't know where we're going to wind up. But number three, in terms of its direct application to medicine, so I disagree that it's in the future. It's now. It's just unevenly distributed, as that old saying. So if you look at the three main applications of artificial intelligence in sick care, operations, finance, clinical. Most of the applications that have been approved by the FDA are in operations, clinical decision support, or revenue cycle management. And the single biggest top of mind subject of healthcare executives when it comes to the use or adoption of AI is how do I find people to take care of patients? It's human resources. Because as you said, physician shortage, post-COVID burnout, can't find enough people to take care, people don't want to get a medicine, whatever. That's the single biggest thing they want AI to do. And oh, by the way, they don't trust it. That is, healthcare executives don't trust artificial intelligence. So when it comes to a vendor trying to pitch an AI product to your hospital, you got to go through all this rigmarole and barriers to adoption. Finally, I think that if you're a grunt in the trenches and a practicing clinician, this is like any other technology that comes down the road and you have to decide, do I want to include artificial intelligence in my therapeutic armamentarium? It's no different than a surgical robot. It's no different than a laser. It's no different than, you name it, a tool, a drug, a something new. Do I want to treat my patients with this thing? And that introduces a whole different analysis of what I call technology adoption errors. And we don't have time to go into all of that, but basically what it means is doctors right now commit type 1 and type 2 technology adoptions for many fairly significantly. That means you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do, and you're not supposed to do what you're not supposed to do. But when you wind up doing something that you're not supposed to do, or you don't do something that you're supposed to do, you have created a technology adoption error. And now the conversation is, well, which is it? Do I get sued if I use AI, or do I get sued if I don't use AI? And the answer is, we don't know. A, we don't know what's going to be the standard of care. And B, when it comes to medical malpractice or product liability, the courts and the law has a long way to go to catch up with this. They're trying to figure this out.
No, certainly that we're seeing quite an evolution very quickly. As you say, we're early in the process, but one of the things that we're trying to encourage physicians is really to get involved somehow in some way, shape, or form. And you can do this through, different ways we can discuss here, or we can do it through joining SOAP. So
Right.
tell us about that. Tell us about SOAP and how can people join
Right.
you and find you and connect with you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So it's simple. You go to www.soapnet.org and you join. Anybody could join. It's a subscription model, even though it's a nonprofit, and it costs the grand total of $80 US. So it's pretty cheap. And I think, and then most of our people think that's pretty good value. So what do you get out of that? Education and access to resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, non-clinical career guidance.
Well, thank you very much for being here. And we're going to take one of these little topics, or so many topics that we had that we couldn't have time for now in this discussion, and discuss it hopefully in our Facebook Live session that we're going to have this week. So thank you very much for being here. Thanks for being so generous with your time and all the knowledge that you've brought us. And we look forward to seeing more of you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. It's been fun.
Thanks. Well, guys, that's it for today. I hope that you learned some. I certainly learned a lot with Dr. Meyers here today. If you want to learn more about him, you can actually go to his website for his Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which is sopenet.org. I hope that you join us, that you subscribe to our podcast, and check out our YouTube channel, which is called Max Allure Mastermind. So check it out. You can see not only all the podcast information, you can also see our extra Friday Facebook Live sessions there and learn a lot more so that you can also design your physician life. Have a great day. We'll see you then. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.